What you're about to experience is one man's quest to see beyond the tumultuous period we're in and to envision what lies just beyond our grasp, yet well within our reach. Welcome to Larry Rifkin's America Trends, where the future has arrived, and it's just in time.
Welcome to America Trends. You know, we can go back to Bye Bye Birdie in the early 60s and recall the refrain, what's the matter with kids today? So maybe it's just that each generation fears that theirs will be the last that has truly been inculcated with the values, the work ethic, and the habits that are necessary for success. Or maybe the idea that America needs to be remade in order to reassert its greatness is a reflection of a weakening or a dilution of the American gene pool, and we're not making a better human product than in the past. But I doubt that. And yet, I must say that from my perspective, the huge millennial generation seems awfully smart to me. Their facility with technology, of course, is legendary, and their openness to people and ideas that were not native to their experiences growing up says a lot about them, at least in my mind. And still, there's a concern that millennials, those born between 1980 and 1994, and I'm the dad of two of them, are perhaps more narcissistic than previous generations. Is that really true? And if so, what does that suggest about our culture going forward? Let's welcome to America Trends today Dr. John Huber. He is the chairman of Mainstream Mental Health, a nonprofit organization that brings lasting and positive change to the lives of people who suffer from mental health issues. He's a clinical forensic psychologist. He practices at 2 long-term acute care hospitals and teaches at Texas State University. Thank you for helping us put millennials on the couch today, Dr. Huber, and thank you for all the work that you're doing on behalf of so many in your community. How are you today?
I'm doing wonderfully, Larry. Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. So when we look at this issue, is this really a factor of a society determined to build up self-esteem and have certificates for all levels of winning? Is that why perhaps this study finds that millennials are more narcissistic than other generations, if that in fact is even true?
Well, I think it's a lot of things. I think that may be part of it. But I think the biggest thing is this whole social media outlet. I mean, your generation, my generation, your kids' generation, you know, they had this outlet that they could actively participate in posting themselves. Hey, I look at me, I'm special. I had pancakes for breakfast.
Yeah, well, the whole selfie generation. I mean, but where did that come from? Don't forget, I mean, we, the baby boomers, are their parents, and we were thought to be the real me generation. And I know there are a lot of folks in my cohort who don't believe that death is a really good alternative, that we must go on forever. I mean, didn't it really start in many ways, if you go from the selfless generation of the World War II vets to the baby boom generation? Wasn't that a dramatic change?
Well, if you look at studies and talking with my grandparents and listening to them tell stories about their parents, every generation has perceived the one behind them as being, you know, this somewhat narcissistic more than them. The difference is now that generation is actually identifying. When we survey them, they're saying, yeah, you know, they're admitting to it. They just don't think it's as great as what the survey is saying that it is.
So who is saying that they're this narcissistic, and what age are those individuals who are saying that there's a greater chasm between their narcissism and, say, even the baby boom generation, and then get into what they're saying about themselves?
Right. The research survey discussed and suggested that it's the 60 plus that are saying this generation are so much more narcissistic than previous generations. And the current generation is admitting, hey, yeah, we are narcissistic. I mean, look at my selfies, look at my Snapchat, and watch me because I'm, you know, doing whatever I'm doing today, but I'm not nearly as narcissistic as Grandpa says I am.
Now, did Facebook and all of these various outlets, did this compel them to become more self-involved, or were they there and Facebook figured it out?
I think Facebook figured it out. I think, before, for you and I and generations before us, if we wanted to be the center of attention, we had to go out and do something like be the star athlete, be the person running for mayor. And we had to put ourselves out there, and it took a lot of effort to do that. And, you don't have to do that today. My daughter can sit there and show you how she does her fingernails all day long, and her friends and everybody sit and, oh, wow, that's great. How did you do this? How did you do that?
I'm sure that's compelling. I mean, I'm sure it is. But let me ask you, in a capitalist society like ours, don't we really want to emphasize these individualistic attributes? I mean, isn't that kind of the way our society works, and will buy more products if it can single us out and make us more distinctive?
Well, and that's that you just said why Facebook did so well. And the problem is, though, these millennials are going to work. And the question I get asked by business is, what do I do with these people? Because they go to work, and 3 months later, they're quitting because they're not having an impact on society.
So they think there's this instant gratification. Does this get back again to that notion of everybody's a winner and everybody needs a trophy?
I think in principle it does. Whether it really affected it that great, more than, for example, the social media apps did, I wish I knew. I want to frame things a little bit different, though. I teach at university, and I've been working with millennials for some time. And granted, I have had students walk into my office complain, why am I getting a D? I made it to every class. I deserve an A. At the same time, I have amazing students that I ask, I need this 5-page paper, and I need it by the end of the week, and I get it tomorrow, and it's 25 pages long, and it's amazing. So I know there are great millennials out there.
Oh, absolutely.
So it's not the whole group. It's the percentage.
How much are they reflecting? And again, I really do think, as a member of the baby boom generation, that we really thought of ourselves as special. And I think there were many in that selfless generation that raised us who really wanted us to have much more than they had. And when we go back and we look at it, it still was rather modest in comparison to what we've been able to give our kids. But nonetheless, this is a continuum. And so we thought we were cooler. We broke away harder with our rock and roll and our long hair and drugs and everything else. So how much is this really just a continuation of what it was that they saw in terms of the rebelliousness of their own parents and their own individuality, asking to be heard, seen, and appreciated?
I think it is a continuation, but it's magnified, I think, at this point by the social media because, again, we sat back, and I love rock and roll. I love the Rolling Stones. But today, a person can sit in their closet, pull up their computer, they can program in the music, make it play perfectly, have all the time signatures perfect. Then they go in there and sing. Their singing's not quite right, so they go and do a pitch adjustment, and they go out there, and everybody thinks they're the next Elvis Presley.
Well, we'll be auto-tuning this entire interview, so don't worry about that, though. Your pitch is really good. Let me ask you about, say, Donald Trump as our leader today. And he is all about self, one man fighting the machine, totally absorbed in the perception and attention paid to him. I mean, he loves the media, despite what he says, displaying little empathy for others, though last night it was on display when he gave a speech, and being scornful of those who are not at the top of the heap. So tell us what that does to a generation.
Well, historically, presidents are typically actually driven by what's happening on a bigger world stage than their own personality types, if you go back historically and look. And then you look also historically, what are the things that make them stand out? The extrovert, and of course now Donald takes that a little further than I think many of our presidents have in the past, and a little bit of narcissism. Again, it's a trait. It's not that he's fully narcissistic, because what I see with a true narcissist, now I don't believe the millennials are true narcissists, because what tends to happen is with a true narcissist, if you criticize them, they kind of collapse in on themselves. And of course, I haven't seen Donald do that. And I think the world stage is going to be a better gauge and judge of how we end up seeing Donald in the future. I agree totally, loves the media, even though he says he doesn't. He's been in the media since 1970s. I remember myself an interview with Barbara Walters where she said, if you were given the presidency, if we just placed you as president today, would you take it? And he said no. Yeah, we see him president today. The thing is, he loves the chase. He likes the game. And if we would have just given him the presidency, I don't think he would have taken it. But because he beat everybody else out, he's going to be the king of the hill now.
You know, the leader who defined my generation, the baby boom generation, was JFK, of course. And we're all products of these various touch points in our life. But he said, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. I think somebody would be in a straitjacket today if they suggested that. But why was it that he was saying, let's all come together around this? Of course, we did, around the goal of getting to the moon and all, and yet we all kind of went on our own way. What was that reflective of, as you see it, that generation?
Well, you know, we saw a generation of war heroes, our you know, the greatest generation, the ones who fought World War II, and he, you know, was watching them sacrifice everything for the good of the nation. And then he was looking at the 60s generation, the hippie generation, and they were trying to start a movement. They needed something. And I think he helped drive that home. You know, ask not what you can do for yourself, but what you can do for your country. And then if we go all the way back to what we originally were talking about, the millennial group thinking they're narcissists, but not as much as we think they are, or the over 60 think they are. I think what we got is, for example, in the 80s, we had the me generation. It's all about me. I want to be me, 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 me. But now we've shifted to, I want to know, and I want to know what you think about me. Not, I really don't care about me. I want to know what you think about me. That's more important, the perception.
It's interesting. I see in China, which again, as an autocratic society, is beginning to take into account some of these social factors in terms of determining what kind of benefits you're going to get out of the society, how well you integrate with others in this socialistic framework. Does that frighten you? Could we get to that? I know there's a series on Netflix that's kind of the new Twilight Zone, and it had an episode where you were getting a score for virtually everything that you did and every interaction that you had. Are we getting to that where you'll get points on your MasterCard if you, in fact, have a good exchange with people? You think we could get to a point where we're all so judgmental that the society really collapses upon itself because of the weight of these determinations?
Wow, if it goes that far. I think, you know, I want to believe that we're a resilient species, and I don't want to think that it would go that far. I think we may get to the point where we are criticizing each other, but then something's going to change. I mean, you know, right, wrong, or indifferent, we read all of the reasons why our current president's in place, and he beat out the old school Republicans and then beat out the Democratic candidate for a reason. I think a lot of people don't like the way things were going. Whether we agree with them or not, he's not, you know, George Bush, and he's not Hillary Clinton or Bill Clinton. You know, we as a society, I'm not saying you or I did, but we as a society took it upon ourselves to elect somebody who is completely outside of the box, and we really don't know what we're getting.
Do you think that some of what we're talking about in terms of, you know, people acting as if on social media they have the best life in the world and they're happy and look at me on vacation, And yet at the same time, when you look at people's disquiet about what's going on and the last election, they aren't really happy with what's going on, at least in society. And I would imagine in their own lives, they're somewhat disaffected, and they're hoping somebody above can help change some of that. So is it really narcissism that we're looking at, or is it a self-defense mechanism that people are putting up a front? And there isn't really a lot of happiness surrounding this self-involvement that we're talking about.
Well, what the research shows on social media, when somebody likes your picture, we actually have measured, you get a small dopamine bump and you get reinforced for that like. So people are being reinforced for saying how wonderful their world is, and they're getting that artificial stimulation, and it's all about them, and they're doing it. They're telling their story. So it's kind of a new form of narcissism, I think, and they're hiding from the realities of life, and they don't want to face them. And as long as they keep telling their good, happy stories, people keep liking them on Facebook, and they keep getting that artificial euphoria that's created by all of those likes.
But what about the whiplash from getting all those really difficult responses to what they're posting at the same time?
Awesome, you block that person and it's done. They've taken care of you. They have mastery over their domain. They get to choose who gets to stay and talk about them.
What do you think
reinforcing?
I'm sorry, go on.
Well, it's reinforcing the whole mechanism.
What about the bowling alone mentality in our society? I know Robert Putnam wrote that book several years ago, and the fact that we don't really have as much communal activity. What impact is that having on the millennials if we, as more of a joiner society, have begun to disconnect? What does that say about them and fraternal organizations and associations going forward?
Well, I think that social media has damaged a lot of that. I mean, I do assessments, psychological assessments on people, and the past couple of years I've gone in and assessed students, and one of the things that I'm asked to do is to make sure that if I identify some kind of emotional problem, that it is across areas, like they do it at work and at home and at school. So I've gone in and observed students in the cafeteria. And cafeterias in high schools today are quieter than I ever remember them being, because they're texting their neighbor, their friend, who's actually sitting right across the table from them. Instead of saying, hello, how are you doing? They're texting, hello, how are you doing? I think it is becoming a problem. And I know with some of the small businesses I work with that they get upset when they hire millennials, and the millennials answer the phone and they don't identify the business they're at or their name. So the person calling has no clue who they're at. They don't know proper etiquette. And you learn that by interacting with other human beings, not with their cell phone.
Well, if I go back to a great album years ago, Dave Mason, Alone Together, I mean, in a sense, it seems as everybody's waiting for the next better social connection. The one that's staring them in the face, or the individual across from them, is not enough of that dopamine in terms of the reaction they're getting. They have to see who's out there waiting to ping them with a text. I mean, what does this distraction suggest to you?
I think in a lot of ways it suggests that people don't know how to be alone. So when they wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning, they don't want to think about, hey, I've got if they're college students, I've got a paper due tomorrow, I've got a test in 2 days, I need to make sure I get my electricity paid, and they'd rather intoxicate themselves with these dopamine bursts by going back to their social media, and then they don't feel like they're alone anymore. They don't feel isolated.
Recently, there were some scientists who carried out personality tests on people at the age of 14, and then again, more than 60 years later, the same group at age 77. And the team found hardly any relationship between traits people had as adolescents and those in their golden years. Does that mean that whatever we're detecting now regarding the millennials is simply a phase?
It may very well be. Historically, we felt like personality was pretty resilient, especially if you were identified with a personality disorder, which usually happens between the ages of 16 and 26. That's usually when people manifest those things. So it may not have manifested at 14. But at the same time, we believe that personality is malleable, or why else would we believe in things like psychotherapy? So, because we can change, and we know that. I think this just gives credence to that, if you don't like the way things are going, you can make a change and have positive effect on yourself.
I'd love to get your comments, Dr. Huber. The lead scientist for this new study from the University of Edinburgh said, quote, very broadly, adolescents become rather less conscientious, more impulsive, more moody and irritable, and more social for a few years. Then they reverse those trends as they move into adulthood. Does that make sense to you?
It makes perfect sense as far as development's concerned. I mean, we start off being very self-centered and egocentric. A newborn baby, their world, it revolves around them. And then we started growing out of that as our world expands beyond, the living room, our bedroom, and the bathroom. And then we go to public school and we see other people. And we're still a little self-centered. But then we hit early teen years, and that self-centeredness comes right back around, and it evolves. And usually, the awakening happens around college age. And they start seeing, hey, there's a world out there, and I'm compassionate. I'm worried about homeless people, and I'm worried about people who have cancer, and I need to go out there and help that. So I think it's a perfectly legitimate statement and very accurate.
Given that many millennials are waiting longer to marry and have families, they can stay self-absorbed for a longer period of time, and they're living in an urban jungle, many of them, and loving that life, and that, of course, is a little bit different than some lives you might live in a rural community where there's a lot of family and a lot of tradition. But then parenthood shocks them into more maturity. Is this part of what we're seeing?
I think traditionally that's exactly what we've been seeing. As you talk about that, I mean, my practice has started growing in that area where I've got parents coming to me with their 28, 35-year-old son or daughter who is still at home and still hasn't started dating, and they're happy not having a job because they're being taken care of. And that becomes problematic. But that population has become a bigger and bigger part of my practice over the last just 3 or 4 years.
Play out for us this millennial issue in terms of what it means for society. I know you're a psychologist, but when you look at it from a sociological standpoint, what does this suggest about our society going forward if, in fact, this is such a big cohort and they are going to be our future leaders, undoubtedly? And what do you think it suggests?
Well, I think this is a small portion of millennials, and they stand out. They're in our face. It's kind of like, the first time I went to New York City and I told people I was from Texas, they asked me how many cattle I had and how big my ranch was. It kind of foreshadows what the reality of it is. And again, I'm working in my office. I have amazing young millennials that they'll work, amazingly competent people, and they'll compete against, 35, 45-year-old people as far as production and how efficient they are. So I think I want to believe that this is a generational phase we're going through, like we talked about before, and the evolution will come back around because society is going to demand. In fact, I've talked with many businesses that are like, what can we do with these employees? We want to fire them, but the next person in line is very much like that one, and they're going to have the same problems. So how do we fix it? And that's probably the biggest thing. The parents didn't do it. The universities didn't do it. Public schools didn't do it. So I think the change is now businesses are going to have to do it. How are they going to change their business environment to not really adapt to, but teach the millennials what is expected of them at this time?
My last question for you. We used to talk about the generation gap. I mean, that was a big issue, not trusting anybody over 30. I don't hear that a lot any longer. What is the relationship as you see it, and you have parents and kids, and you talked about some who have not left the nest. What is the relationship as you see it between, say, the baby boom generation or Gen X and the millennials?
The difference that I'm seeing with my generation, for example, we talked about our parents, we cared about our parents, we loved our parents, but they were our parents. Our friends were people who were close to our age. What I see today when people walk in, when I have the millennials, even my college students, even the ones that are functioning really highly and doing well, when we talk about their parents, they talk about, oh, my dad's my best friend, my mom's my best friend. And I want them to like their parents, but being their best friend is not a parent's role. A parent's role is to be a parent. And that means help the child when they fail to recover from that and learn from their mistakes and move forward.
I want to thank Dr. John Huber for being with us today on America Trends. He is the chairman of Mainstream Mental Health, a nonprofit organization bringing lasting and positive change to the lives of individuals suffering from mental health issues. He's a mental health professional in over 20 years of experience, and Dr. Huber is a clinical forensic psychologist. He is a practitioner. He has privileges at 2 long-term acute care hospitals. In addition, he is also a professor at Texas State University. Thanks again for listening to America Trends, where the future has arrived, and thankfully it's just on time.